Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cracking Commerce. And today we are cracking down on the concept of total cost of ownership. We have Phil Clark from Say Yes Agency to share his insights about what TCO is and what brands can do about it. Hi, Phil. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Maria, and yeah, thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm really excited to get started.
Sure. So before we get into it, and why don't you share your background and how you got into the agency space and especially e-commerce and what you're doing right now with Say Yes?
Yeah, sure. So, say yes, we're a UK-based Shopify agency. We focus on brand and product storytelling, and what that distills down to is brands who really have a core strength to the background of their brand, whether that be a founder story or a particular manufacturing process or really high quality product. And we help them to tease out what's special about their brand as part of their online digital experience. I head up strategy here at Say Yes, from both a technical perspective and an ongoing e-commerce strategy. And I've been in the e-commerce space for probably around 8 years now, having previously worked in digital transformations in retail. Um, yeah, really keen to advocate advocate for Shopify as well. I think in terms of how it serves mid-market and growing brands, it's absolutely exceptional. So yeah, keen to field some questions around how it may be able to help with TCO.
Right. So what kind of brands do you work with at Say Yes?
So we are a boutique consultative agency. So we work with like a small number of brands, but we work exclusively with those brands in a consultative manner to really dig into the detail of what those brands do, how they function, who their customer is, and how we can help align the digital experience and their online platform with the expectations of their customers. So we don't necessarily work in any specific vertical. What we do have is a commonality around there is a strong story to be told for those brands. So our brands include a home and garden brand called Power Sheds, who are a Shopify headless customer using Sanity as the CMS. We are helping them spearhead their international expansion, which is a really exciting time for them. We also work with a brand called Get Baked, which is a Leeds based bakery brand who they go viral multiple times a week. They have a really engaging, interesting founder who is very colloquial and laid back in his approach to social media. And what we are working on with them is how we bring his personality and the brand personality through online. And so there isn't any kind of disconnect between what their profile looks like on social media and what their online store and how it presents itself. They also have physical stores in both Leeds and Manchester. So what we try to do as best we can is align the experience of the in-store customers versus their online customer. We also have a number of women's fashion brands, including Live Unlimited London and Rowanzo, and then we're working with a couple of jewellery brands and that kind of thing as well. General profile of the brands we work with is anything in the kind of 10 to 50 million GBP turnover range. As I say, there is no specific vertical. It's about finding those brands who have got something really interesting to say. We know anecdotally that the world of e-com is in a very interesting time. You had the headwinds of COVID pushing everything online, and everyone really seeing some astronomical growth in in some circumstances. But what's then happened after that is really quite interesting, and we're finding certain brands they need a little bit of additional support. They may have grown massively in COVID, and then they had last year where there was a realization of kind of the world returning to normal. Bricks and mortar retail opened back up, and there was more challenge going on. So the reason we focus on brand and product storytelling is that we need brands, or brands need, should I say, their customers to turn into advocates of the brand as opposed to just mere consumers. And through deep brand storytelling, we enable our customers to stay front of mind for their customers. And what that leads to is long term brand advocacy. And for the long term, in terms of the lifetime value of that client and that customer, it becomes infinitely more powerful.
Interesting. So I was looking at your background. You have worked in retail, and then you went into the agency space, quite a couple of agencies there. So, and now there's also this tool that you're building, Optify. which is a price optimization tool on your LinkedIn profile. So,
That's right.
yeah, can you share a little bit about that tool? And I'm also curious, like a lot of agencies these days, they are, building their own product portfolio. So, what made you, build that product?
So as an agency, we've always been very aware, and I think this is symptomatic of the Shopify ecosystem in general. There is lots of things that are partnerships focused, and as a result of that, and from a personal perspective as well, I very much like working in a world in which you can go and have face to face meetings with partners. You can go to events, as I mentioned earlier on, and I very much, and we as a business, we lean into the physical relationships that we can create if geography allows to go and actually spend time in the room with people. And so I came across a couple of years ago a founder, a chap called Professor Dan Franks, and he's working with another university professor called Dr. Jordan Hart. So both of them have backgrounds in AI and machine learning. And at the time, they were working in a completely different sphere. They weren't working with e-commerce, but they were doing something really interesting with this type of AI called causal AI. And what they were doing was incredibly interesting, but not necessarily related to what I was doing. So I met them, we had a really good chat, but then after that, nothing really happened until about 6 to 12 months ago, where Dan had chosen to pivot his business and focus on e-commerce. And what they are doing essentially is using advanced AI and a algorithm based on Bayesian modeling to enable merchants to, through their Shopify store, as they expand into new regions, test optimal product pricing to optimize their profit. Now, what we've seen anecdotally is that when a brand chooses to grow internationally, let's say you have a UK based brand looking to grow into Germany, they might retail their product at £20 through their online channel. And when they look to grow into Germany, they might go, okay, it takes an extra £4 logistically for it to get to Germany. So I will add that on top and I will do a little bit around psychological pricing and I might charge £25 in Germany. Now, what that does is accounts for the reality of the logistics of getting it there. But what it doesn't account for is the local competition in Germany. How are UK brands seen to the German market versus what we see over here? And actually, we are just taking our best guess at growing internationally at how pricing should sit. So, what Optify enables merchants to do is actually run rapid fire testing over a couple of week period, runs much, much faster than conventional A B testing, and enables them to optimize the price of all of their products in new markets without the guesswork. And obviously, with everything that's going on in the world around tariffs, etc., there are features built in there that enable you to tweak not only your railguards of upper and lower pricing, but also if tariffs change, you can amend that in Optify, and you can continually better assess the value of your products to the audience in different countries around the world. And as we know, profitability is so important that when we had the opportunity to work with Dan and Jordan to help them grow Optify, um, I essentially messaged Sean, my co-founder, after I'd had a meeting with Dan, and said to him straight away, "We need to work with Dan." So as a result, we've diversified our service offering. Yes, we do conventional design and build services, but we are also helping Dan with his go-to-market and introducing him to some of our partners, some of the brands we've historically worked with. So although we aren't the technical hands-on experts with the tool itself, we are facilitating their growth into the e-commerce market, which is a really exciting thing to do.
Yeah, really interesting. So, uh, getting into the meat of the episode, and before we, talk about the more juicier stuff, I wanted to zoom out for the folks that are not as well versed in the lingo. Why don't you define what TCO is, and yeah, what do you mean by it?
Yeah, we absolutely love an acronym in the e-com and the tech space, don't
Yeah.
we? Yeah, TCO, total cost of ownership, to those people not familiar. And I suppose at base level, to really drill it down to the basics, is what TCO is a comprehensive look at all of the expenses involved in running your e-commerce store. And that may include everything from subscription fees to any platforms you may be using, any apps you may be using as well. If there are, depending on the stack you're using, hosting or maintenance costs, costs of engineering on that platform, operational costs around the users of that platform as well. And also then there is this other concept around what's called opportunity costs. So we'll probably get into that in more detail, but how I would summarize that base level is for brands and merchants working on outdated legacy platforms, what you tend to find is they don't perform as well in terms of how they will rank on Google, as an example, because there might be issues with site load speed or things like that. But also the conversion rate, i.e., getting those users who've landed on your site through to the checkout and purchasing products from you. If your site is not as slick as possible, built to optimize for conversions, there is an opportunity cost there because you've got someone in the door of your site. If they're not leaving with a product in their basket and in the checkout, then you've missed that opportunity to sell to them. With rising costs of acquisition and getting people to actually purchase, it's really important for brands, particularly those looking to grow, that you really minimize the opportunity cost.
Right. So, how do you really calculate the TCO?
So, in terms of calculating the total cost of ownership, it's quite a tricky one to do in that some of the costs they're not immediately apparent. So the one thing that I would say is it needs time and effort to really go and understand it, and whether that is something that a brand or a merchant can take on internally, or they may choose to work with a partner to do almost a TCO audit, if you like. Now, there are certain things that can be done quite quickly and easily. So, for example, platform subscription fees, app costs, hosting and maintenance costs, bandwidth costs potentially, or anything that is on a sliding scale based on usage of the site. So, those things should be available in your business data or your BI, and you should be able to quite quickly have a look at those and total them up, be it on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis for help with forecasting ahead. Engineering costs as well. Now, that would be whether it's an internal developer cost or an external agency partner. You can total those up quite quickly. Where there is difficulty and nuance is though engineering costs and the split of those. It's not always exactly apparent what is a liability and what is an investment in future growth. So, as an example, if you were to look at the amount of work done by your developers or your engineers in a given month, if they are spending 80% of their time just on maintenance or reactive bug fixes, as an example, you can quite easily assess that as being a liability to you because you're spending 80% of your time to essentially stand still. You're not adding anything new that is adding features and adding additional value to your customers. However, if it's the other way around and you're adding new features, you're adding something to really enrich the customer experience and help drive the performance of your site, then actually that can be seen as investment. So there is nuance there, and it's important when we talk about TCO to understand, do I have a high TCO because we're investing in future growth and we can see a return on investment for what we're looking at? Or are we spending all of this money purely to stand still where more nimble and agile competitors in our market might be investing in overtaking us, essentially?
Yeah, yeah,
So I
makes sense.
suppose the sum takeaway really is it needs to be thoroughly reviewed with honest conversations, whether that's workshops, whether that's audits. And what I would say to brands or merchants who aren't immediately clear as to how they would do it themselves, there is a number of agency partners out there in the world or consultants who would help with that process. We ourselves have done it for a number of brands, and quite often we would do it from a Shopify standpoint and say, well, if you were to migrate from Adobe Commerce onto Shopify, this is a potential benefit for you. And that's not necessarily to save that money to just pocket as additional profit. What we often look at is what is the opportunity to unlock budget to then fuel back into the e-commerce experience to further expand the business reach and fuel growth.
Mhm. Yeah, makes sense. So it's not as simple to calculate your TCO. So it's not just what you're paying, but also what you're paying to keep the software running smoothly. So it's the maintenance cost, and that's where it gets tricky, especially the cost of developers, and also like the opportunity cost is also very nuanced, and it's not as simple to calculate.
Yeah, it's really true. And opportunity cost is something that is so hard to quantify. But there's an example I use when I talk a little bit around TCO, where we work with a lot of mid-market, often founder-led brands. And realistically, when somebody founds a business, let's use Get Baked that I talked about earlier. The founder is very much, he is hyper focused on brand and product. He started that business to grow this incredible brand, to make these incredible products, to enable his customers to best enjoy them as they see fit. Now, the worst possible scenario for him is he spends 80% of his time looking at technical issues, looking at what are issues with the tech stack, why is this broken, why does that not look right on the page? Because what that does is take him away from developing his business further and engaging with his customers to further enhance his audience and their desire to shop with his brand. And therefore, it's him not doing the things that he set out to do as part of founding his business. He's becoming a lot more technical than he needs to. And that rings true for any number of businesses. Fundamentally, a lot of e commerce managers focus on being marketeers as much as anything. Yes, there is a degree of making the site work and trading and looking at merchandising, etc. But outside of that, really, we focus on freeing up brands and brand operators to do the things that they do best, which more often than not are product and brand.
Yeah, makes sense. So my next question is around perpetual licenses, and we have seen a lot of platforms. They have uh, instead of perpetual licenses, they have introduced subscription fees. So do you what is your opinion around it, and do you think that is causing TCOs to rise for many software companies and e-commerce brands?
I I think potentially yes, is the short answer to that. But I think it's important to make the distinction between whether a rising cost is a bad thing or not. So, as an example, a lot of whether they're SaaS products, whether they're platforms, etc., they go onto a subscription, and as the business revenue grows or the transaction number grows, number of email subscribers, for example, grows, the subscription fee becomes on a sliding scale. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing because logic usually dictates that if you're growing your audience, you're growing your number of transactions, you're growing your number of sales, as long as you're operating your business in a profitable manner outside of the digital space, but also including it, then actually that is a positive thing. Now, what I would say is that if you are completely kind of increasing your TCO disproportionately to the business growth and it's impacting on bottom line profitability, then that is a problem. And that's something that when you're looking at TCO, it's important to not view it as a one and done kind of activity. You have to constantly review it and constantly look at where are your opportunities. If I'm using a platform or a particular tool, am I getting the most out of it that I possibly can? I use an analogy quite often when I talk to brands around if you hired a warehouse, you wouldn't just work in a small corner of it. You would use every foot of that space to optimize your business operations. And that's very, very true with digital platforms or SaaS products. It's really important that when you are selecting the technology that you're going to use, you really take the time to understand where does this fit in the big picture? What are all the features I can use and really maximize that? So yes, there is an inevitability around a growing cost of ownership. But as long as that is proportionally aligned to business profit and growth, then it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm. Makes sense. Okay, so when talking about the total cost of ownership, is it like always the rule of thumb to go for cost reduction, or if there are times and use cases when you would recommend a brand to invest in their tech stack? So it's actually a debate of whether invest or reduce. What would you recommend?
Yeah, yeah, and again, this is a super nuanced question, and very much, if I put my best politician stance on, it depends.
Yeah.
It very much depends on what the brand wants to achieve. Now, from our perspective, one of the reasons we chose to set up as a boutique agency is because it allows us to be highly consultative with the brands that we work with, and we really help align ourselves with what their goals are as a business. And by doing so, we help to understand what are the buying decisions from a technology perspective going to do, and does it help us with align with those goals or does it not? Now, as an example, Power Sheds that I mentioned previously, they prior to migrating to Shopify about 8 months ago, they were on a WooCommerce store, and what they were finding was a large part of their development budget every month was reactive bug fixes. They were spending a lot of money to stand still. At the same time, they were going through a really exciting branding process to essentially create a branded product within a largely unbranded market. When you think of sheds and log cabins and garden buildings in general, there aren't a lot, particularly in the UK, of highly well-known brands. There isn't an equivalent of the Hoover in the vacuum cleaner market. There isn't a Sheds equivalent. So Jack and the team at Power Sheds had an aspiration to create this, and what we worked with them on was a migration away from WooCommerce onto Shopify, a Shopify headless build using Sanity as the CMS. And what that has set them up with is a platform for growth. We've subsequently launched internationalized stores which are fully translated from both a language perspective, but also imperial measurements into metric as well, which is really important for the cultural norms of that country. And we've also spun up a international store to serve the Irish market again with full internationalization and localized content. Now, for them, in terms of comparing side by side, their cost of ownership has gone up, but their opportunity by using a more stable, a more feature rich site that leverages a full custom front end that really enables us through animation, micro interactions, and much cleaner, crisper UI enables them to really position themselves as a premium product within the market. And then we've also leveraged really, really useful tools to syndicate their reviews across all of the other retail partners that they work with as well. For them, they really, really invested in their tech stack because it has then unlocked any number of different avenues of growth for them. And we're also working on a number of further projects going forward to enhance either the in-store experience at the retail partners that they work with or their online experience. Now, in that case, a higher cost of ownership is really beneficial. We also see the flip side quite often where we will talk to merchants who we're not working with who may be on Adobe Commerce. We worked with a migration away from THG's Ingenuity platform a couple of years ago. And for them, their reason for reducing their cost of ownership was to move away from these expensive legacy platforms onto Shopify to then enable them to reinvest in the Shopify ecosystem and the plugins and apps that are available through the Shopify App Store and really focus on the customer experience and bringing the right tools at the right time in a much more easy fashion compared to what they were used to doing before. So for them, the right thing to do was to reduce their cost of ownership to get onto Shopify, which then again unlocked opportunity growth. So very, very different opportunities and circumstances around TCO, but the common thread between them is they both or they all had growth in mind, and it was about making the right decision based on the right stage of their business growth.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing both the case studies, which highlight the two different sides of TCO, and I think it also ties back to our previous discussion about opportunity cost, because even if the brand is investing, there were the opportunity cost at the time was higher, uh, so that investment was to get what they were not getting from that. So
The case studies that you've mentioned were amazing, and we've been in the discussion with a lot of our clients. And in one scenario, what we did, so it is related with the TCO. So what we did, we started working on the TCO, but what happened? We end up auditing all the apps; those are already in place, right? Just to see what sort of information that they are looking for, just to get rid of all those are not required, right? So I think in that scenario, the conclusion of the whole audit was, first of all, just to categorize the apps you'd like to keep in your infrastructure or not, because these days a lot of apps are getting more information than required. So I guess that's also a part of TCO. When you are um, excluding some of the apps. So before even the price, compliance is also an issue, right? So yeah, I guess it's vice versa, and compliance is also a part in it, and removing app is another dimension. But first of all, compliance is very important thing. And these days, I've seen some apps. They were they were getting everything, like every information. So we need to be pretty aware if we are, assisting our clients. Yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think there's compliance is one part of that particular discussion. Two, kind of time to manage all of those different apps. I see quite a lot of stores, particularly if we inherit a Shopify store from another agency, or the brand may have even built it themselves over time. The Shopify store is so easy to go onto in particular and just click install, and you can try a bunch of these apps. And one of two things happens when these apps get installed is they may just install and they don't necessarily inject code into the liquid theme, but in certain instances they do. And it's really important if merchants or brands choose to install an app, if they then decide to remove it, to make sure that there is a subsequent follow up to ensure that all of the elements of that app are taken out of the theme code, because there can be performance issues as a result of that. I mean, that's assuming that these brands actually get round to removing the apps at all. Quite often, I will come in and when we onboard a new customer, we'll go and look at their list of apps, and it's not unusual to be scrolling up kind of an endless scroll looking at all of these apps, and some of them it's kind of questionable as to what that app actually ever did. So it's really important, as you say, from a compliance point of view, but also from a performance point of view on the front end. If you've injected a load of additional code into your theme that is being loaded but not used, you're penalizing yourself by doing that. So it's a really, really important thing to go through. Quite often, app audits are one of the first things that we will do with brands, alongside an overall performance audit as well, to see how they're performing. We're in a very important time where customer experience on site is so important, not only for people who have landed on your site already, but people who are going to land on your site organically through search engines, etc. If you land on a site and it's not performant, it's not quick. There are so many websites out there where you can buy products these days that if you don't have a site that is performant, you're really going to struggle for the long term.
absolutely.
Okay, so coming to the practical stuff, well, what are some of the proven strategies, some processes that you would recommend for brands who want to audit their TCO, calculate their TCO, and then reduce the cost?
Yeah, I think auditing and reviewing has got to be step one. And as I alluded to higher in the call, it can't be something that you just do kind of once a year and forget about it. It's it's a difficult thing to do, and it's something that is hard to make time for if you're trying to do that internally. So if it's something that you become unable to resource internally, I would recommend brands that put aside some of their engineering or development budget every year to have someone else look at this for you. Um, I think it's really important, as Osama mentioned, to look at plugins and apps. That's one of the things that we see most often, is because it's so easy to install apps in the App Store, your costs incrementally creep up and creep up and creep up, and the next thing, before you know it, you end up with some apps that are costing you kind of potentially hundreds of pounds or dollars per month and not actually being used for the best of their ability. There's also a wide range of apps now that have crossover from a functional perspective. And there is a very strong argument to suggest, well, rather than having three different apps for loyalty, reviews, and subscriptions, is there a single app that can do all of it and consolidate the tech into a single thing? Then hopefully we're improving performance as well, as long as that singular solution is well built. So audit and review where you're at constantly with the numbers around TCO, but also audit and review the apps that you're being used and ensure that you are getting the most out of those. Now, a lot of the apps built specifically for Shopify, there will be account managers or customer success managers or growth managers who you can get in touch with. And it's really important that if you feel like you need a bit more support as a brand with one of the apps that you're using, reach out to the support teams, because essentially they are incentivized to help you grow using their platform. And I think what I don't see enough of is brands or merchants really going to these SaaS providers and say, hey, look, we're struggling with this particular thing. Could you either point me in the right direction of the help docs, or can we perhaps do an enablement call where we train some of our team on there as well? Most of the partners that we work with have really, really great help documentation and videos. And I think one area within the SaaS world that is improving so rapidly is the customer service side of things with advancements in AI, etc. So I would make sure that of the tech that you do have, be that an e-commerce platform or a SaaS product, make sure that you're not backwards in going forwards in terms of getting the support you need as and when. And then what I would also suggest that is worth doing on a in a more longer term basis, particularly when anyone like the CFO or the finance team get involved, is as you're forecasting your business growth, 12, 24, 36 months out, there are a lot of apps now out there, which you alluded to earlier, that bill based on a sliding scale, whether that's around sessions, subscribers, overall revenue, gross profit, etc., etc. So it's really important to, as you do your business forecasting, also forecast the growth in your tech costs, because what you can then see is it'd be very easy if I put my technical costs in as flat, but my turnover growth is like this, you're just going to miss forecast. And actually, when you scale that up exponentially across a number of years, you end up with quite a big budget deficit. So it's really, really important to make sure that you understand the tools that you have available to you. One thing that I recommend all of the brands we work with do is have a technical diagram, just to say, look, this is what we're using on a day to day. And that doesn't have to be a huge in-depth process to create that. It's more often than not, it's relatively straightforward to do that for brands up to a certain level of complexity. What you tend to find is brands above that base level of complexity, they might have a solutions architect or a CTO in place anyway, which generally speaking, they're going to do that piece. I think it's a real it's a really important balance to find between the business operators and the technical teams, whether that's through an agency or an external partner or an internal one. I think where this falls down quite often, if it does fall down, is a disconnect between finance, trading, and the technical team or the agency.
Mhm. Makes sense. So all of the conversation that we are having, uh, it comes back to the age-old debate, which is composable versus monolith. So we have been having these conversations with a lot of people, and I wanted to know from you, from a TCO perspective, do you think composable is a cost saver or a cost trap?
Um, I think the first thing I would say is it can be either.
Mhm.
Technical implementations, it's not a straightforward thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, there is good implementations and there is bad on both the monolithic scale and the composable stack. I think there is also nuance to that in that the technology itself matures in certain areas. So, as an example, we work with Shopify's hydrogen setup with Sanity, as I mentioned on a couple of occasions.
Yeah.
Now, hydrogen is at what's called V2 at the moment. And I think it's fair to say that the technology that was used for hydrogen V1 perhaps wasn't quite there. It wasn't quite fit for purpose in a number of instances. In terms of headless versus monoliths or composable versus monoliths, where we were at initially was, I think that Shopify's Hydrogen V1, it saw a lot of people migrate on there. And I think what subsequently happened was there were some quite high profile moves back from headless onto Shopify liquid themes. And I think what that did was potentially scare a number of brands who were potentially considering headless, and they kind of waited it out. And actually, Shopify spend billions and billions of dollars every year on their technical improvements with their engineering teams and bringing to market new features. And they are very much closing the gap and focusing on the enterprise market these days. And as a result, the argument for headless or composable stacks is becoming almost more and more nuanced as Shopify close the gap. it becomes harder potentially to justify a composable stack. However, what we do find, particularly in what we focus on, is the differentiation between growth and a really strong brand can dictate the difference between a monolithic stack and a composable one. There are also a number of nuanced discussions to go through around kind of SEO and URL structure. Is there a particular need for an omni-channel experience between physical retail and online? Are there other parts of a business that are not necessarily best served by a Shopify liquid theme? So I think composable has its place in the market, absolutely, for the right brands. And for those brands, it's certainly not a cost trap because it can actually be key to unlocking further growth for them. However, one thing that I would say is we've certainly seen in the past brands migrating to a composable stack who potentially didn't need to be, using native tools to Shopify or really strong third-party plugins, working with strong Shopify Plus partner agencies and development agencies. You can achieve some unbelievable things on a monolithic stack with Shopify. And for myself, I know you guys work with a number of tech stacks. For ourselves, we very much aligned ourselves with Shopify because I feel, certainly for the mid-market or SMBs, it should be the go-to opportunity, should be the go-to platform in 2025. And certainly the data suggests that's true, right? I know there's been a couple of kind of small challenges to that, and there are some USPs around some of the other platforms out there, but fundamentally Shopify is setting itself up to win. And I think the anecdotal evidence of these big brands who are now migrating across to Shopify, either with a liquid theme or a composable stack, it's proof that Shopify is here to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, Shopify is, thought to be a platform with a lower TCO. So, um, and you also specialize in Shopify. So I'm curious to know, because there are a lot of conversations happening on LinkedIn about whether Shopify is suitable for complex commerce, and especially in B2B e-commerce, and in some specific niche industries like life sciences or maybe industrial machinery. So what are your thoughts about it, and do you think Shopify is suitable for these kind of complex scenarios?
So out of the box, potentially not, but I think that is a strategic move by Shopify in terms of where they spend their own development efforts. I like to talk about Shopify building for the many, not
Yeah.
the few. The amount of stores on Shopify worldwide who have, nothing is not complex when you're growing a business. However, in terms of the use cases of what most people need, Shopify and a base theme or a theme you may buy from one of the premium ones from the theme store, they tick an awful lot of boxes. And what I think Shopify have done very, very well is cultivate the Shopify partner ecosystem. There is very strong psychology around saying we have a partners ecosystem, and what that enables growing brands to do is the theme may get them 80-90% of the way there for the basics, and then you bring in a partner to bridge that last 10% where you maybe need something a little bit more complex. Now, in terms of particular verticals that may not have a direct alignment with some of the things that Shopify does, that's where headless may come into the equation potentially, and having the full, a fully custom front end, API driven, that enables integrations with any number of other platforms, and leveraging that in a way that makes sense for that business and something completely bespoke. It still makes sense to come to Shopify because it handles all of the orders, all of the customer data particularly well. You've got that commerce engine that is really well tried and tested, and not to mention one of Shopify's core selling propositions is the use of the checkout and how highly it converts versus some of the other platforms, and that is improving every day as well, with checkout extensibility options that have been around for the last kind of 12 months or so. So we ourselves have done some really interesting things with whether it's shipping dates or rates or making sure that you segment certain rates versus certain products. There are some off-the-shelf apps that can do this naturally, but for brands that have more, so Power Sheds again, they have very specific delivery rules about different types and sizes of products based on weights and dimensions, and only certain days being available in a certain year. And we built a custom app for them, still within the Shopify ecosystem, but completely bespoke and nuanced to that business that really has helped them kind of tighten up on their profitability, which is great. The flip side of that as well, we're looking at that from a financial perspective, but it is also better for their customers because they're not being let down by being promised a certain delivery date at checkout and then getting a phone call to say it needs to come on a certain date. There is huge opportunity to do really bespoke and complex things. You just need to find a good partner where the native Shopify tools don't necessarily tick that box.
That was a great answer. So, yeah, so Shopify might not, check the box out of the box. So it might not give everything out of the box for specific niche industries, but then you have the opportunity to customize, and especially with Shopify Hydrogen, which is such a mature, platform. So it gives you the opportunity to create a completely bespoke experience. So yeah, that answers our question.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note as well when I see this point brought up around Shopify and it's well, it's not necessarily fit for purpose for X or for Y or for Z, but actually not a lot of the other platforms are necessarily. They might be a little bit more feature rich and they might have like for like some things that Shopify doesn't do. But do they then have tools to bridge the gap of everything that Shopify does really well? So it's a difficult question to answer. And for things like B2B, as an example, there is an incredible B2B tool called SparkLayer that has been built within the Shopify ecosystem that enables people, without even going onto Shopify Plus, Shopify Advanced merchants can use it and get some really great advanced B2B functionality. And you're looking at potentially $149 a month or something like that to really extend out the capability of what you can do with Shopify and B2B. So there is always something or someone somewhere who is building for the Shopify ecosystem, like Dan at Optify that we spoke about before, because it has this building reputation of partners and functions. If I was going to come to market with a SaaS product to help with e-commerce, the first place I would build for would be build an integration with Shopify, because that's where the mass market is these days. So I think while Shopify themselves are spending millions or billions of dollars on their development, you also have the partner ecosystem doing the same. So as it continues to grow, I think they're only going to close that gap more and more.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. So, to wrap it up, and I think we have had a very good, insightful discussion around TCO, and it just makes it more clear what it is and what strategies brands can use to reduce their total cost, and whether even if it's a good idea to go for a cost reduction. And there are certainly times when investment is a better advice for them. So I think the first step for any e-commerce brand that is considering this route is to first consult a partner, obviously, and to get the real cost of investment, real cost of their tech stack, and whether it's what opportunity cost they have and what opportunities they have for growth and cost reduction. So I think to wrap it up, Phil, where can our listeners find you if they want to know about you or your work?
Sure. So we have our own website, which is www.sayyes.co. And I'm also all over LinkedIn, always posting content about something Shopify related, whether it's the events that we run, the partners that we work with. We also have Instagram, and soon we will be, based on an event that we ran last week, we've got a load of content to share. So not coming soon to YouTube and TikTok as well, but I can guarantee there will be no dancing in our videos on TikTok. It's very much from an e-commerce perspective.
Great, great.